back to the Backwards History Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Will, here with my co-host, Kevin. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Shut up, Kevin.
Stop telling me what to do.
It's my show, man.
You want me to walk? Good luck
can.
finding someone with my credentials.
Fair enough. Stay where you are. As always, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us on our last episode. We really enjoyed having the time to sit down with Shane from the local news station, talking about the Apollo 11 hoax, or supposed hoax.
Or conspiracy.
Yeah, go back to that episode to find out our opinions on it, because we won't tell you here.
It's already been recorded.
Right. Can't cheat. Listen to 2 episodes at once. But today's episode, we want to talk about something that not only is a historical problem,
True,
but is a modern problem. Something we see in the news every single day. Media manipulation.
and that's a very good point. If you know the signs to look for, media manipulation is everywhere, not just in news, radio, newspapers. I think, in my opinion, most prevalent newspapers.
I think that's more true for past generations. Now the most prevalent place and the place that people get most of their news is social media.
That's a very good point. Changing times, changing technologies. What's the fastest way to feed the masses information or misinformation?
I mean, it goes all the way back to the founding of our country and prior, when, printing presses were new. New, yeah. You had to swap out every letter and print them one at a time over and over.
And that was still leaps and bounds ahead of doing it by hand.
Right. And there was manipulation throughout the centuries in handwritten pieces of when it was on parchment rather than paper.
Right. Long before paper.
Or reed paper.
Sheepskin.
Right.
Was a common one.
Right. Then you had the advent of something like radio, where people were getting the news auditorily rather than having to read it. So it reached more people because...
Reach more people more quickly.
Because especially at that time, I mean, it's still true today. There are people who can't read. A lot of people who can read don't quite get that there are people who still can't read. But at the time when radio came out, it was even more prevalent than it is today. Mm-hmm. And there were even misinformation campaigns by radio, one that you wanted to talk about specifically.
Oh, yes. We're all familiar with the War of the Worlds, Orson Welles radio broadcast, October 30th, 1938. Mass hysteria swept the country. People shooting their guns in the street thinking they're seeing flying saucers, little green men from Mars.
Just to clarify, the War of the Worlds was a radio broadcast where basically it acted like it was a news report stating that aliens were attacking the world, and that they'd annihilated, major cities and yada, yada, yada. So people went nuts. I mean, they kind of did, but they kind of didn't.
Right. And this is a story I grew up with my whole life, and I just accepted it as true because I'd been told by so many different sources, so many different people that it...
Not the alien invasion, just to be clear. He took it to be true that people lost their minds when they heard the radio transmission.
And another throwback, if you listen to our episode on aliens, then you know my stance on...
Aliens.
You gotta throw up the hands.
Throw up the hands, right.
But if you do a little more research into it, there's actually no concrete evidence that there was ever any mass hysteria that swept the country. It was actually a conspiracy by many newspapers to discredit radio and to try to harm the image of radio as this new emerging technology that was slowly replacing newspapers.
So basically you're saying that newspapers were like, oh my God, you guys, these people did this thing and it caused so much problems, we should really stop using radio? That was the basic...
I don't know if they did the Valley Girl thing, but it was more or less.
I think the Valley Girl thing gave it a little bit more flair.
I think people... Well, definitely flair. I'll give you flair. But there was a lot of false reporting, just absolute lies that were reported by newspapers over this radio. And the thing was, we're all familiar, or I hope you are, with the Nielsen Group, who track viewer ratings. Even back then, they were tracking viewer ratings on radio. And a survey done before the radio show, the day of, they surveyed 5,000 people. And less than 2% said they were actually going to listen to Orson Welles' radio show. So that's a very, very small group of people who are actually going to listen to it. And then there were no police reports of, violent crimes, looting, burning, anything like that. There were no hospital records of people being admitted for, gunshot wounds, anything of that nature. So there's actually absolutely no evidence of mass hysteria or anything to corroborate these stories, unless you go and look at microfilm reels of newspapers that reported people having heart attacks, people fighting in the streets, looting, burning, just absolutely losing their minds. But there's absolutely no other sources of information that can corroborate that story.
And another one that we already touched on a previous episode was after the crash of the 1920s. People committing suicide and things of that nature because of, oh my God, my finances are in shambles, blah, blah, blah. There was only a few actual confirmed instances of people committing suicide.
I believe there were 2 confirmed. But you see in popular media.
But listen to the media, it was mass suicides. People were just
throwing themselves from their windows. Yeah. Just panic in the streets.
It's even been immortalized in movies. If you watch, I believe it's Men in Black 3.
Yeah, when he's going back.
He's going back in time. He's jumping off the building. You see him going forward in time to the point of where he's trying to get to. Mm-hmm. And there's men jumping out of the building.
Right.
Supposedly bankers and that kind of stuff in the 1920s jumping to their deaths. And there were several. So it's come to the point of like full-on acceptance of this myth.
Right. If it's one of those things, if you hear a story enough times from enough sources, you'll accept it as true.
Right. There's something that's a little bit more sinister about it than, competing entities wanting to point the finger at each other. Mm-hmm. There's a CIA operation by the name of Operation Mockingbird, where CIA agents were embedded in the different news organizations of our country. To kind of steer what was released, and not always necessarily for national security reasons, more for public opinion reasons. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially considering we have the First Amendment, we have the freedom of the press, we have the freedom to disseminate information. But if our information is being skewed by our government, is it really press? When does it cross the line from being press and becoming propaganda?
It's a very fine line.
And most recently, the NDA. Most people think of when they think of the NDA, they think that it just has to do with people being able to be indefinitely detained if they're suspected of terrorism. Mm-hmm. But the new NDA actually removed a previous ruling that said that propaganda basically couldn't be used on American people, but only on foreign governments and foreign citizens and da-da-da. It actually removed that stipulation. So not only can you be imprisoned indefinitely for terrorism or suspected terrorism, they don't even have to have... You're guilty until you're proven innocent later, which is completely against the way
our justice system is designed.
Right. But it also allows for the American government to lie to you. Legally lie to you. It's one thing to keep things a secret. Mm-hmm. It's a whole other thing to lie to you.
Right, you got lying, and then you got lying by omission.
Right, and I'd rather the people that I pay for, mm-hmm. or actually that I'm forced to pay for, because I don't even have the opportunity to willingly give my money every 2 weeks. It's automatically taken out of my check.
Like clockwork.
Right. But another thing that me and Kevin just learned about that our tax dollars are being used for, apparently the Department of Defense has a group of individuals that have like 10 spoof accounts apiece on different social media accounts, and they will intentionally inject themselves into conversations to basically spread statist opinions or propaganda. I'm not against pro-U.S. information, mm-hmm. but this will be strategic pro-U.S. ideas and opinions, mm-hmm. to basically stamp out opposition, stamp out any talk of anything else. But it's very disingenuous because you've got these people that are government paid employees going into civilian conversations and trying to steer a government approved narrative or opinion to stamp out anybody arguing against it, which is kind of wrong. It's criminal almost.
Just saying it sounds un-American.
It sounds very Orwellian, doesn't it?
It really does. As that one song, I think by John Mayer, when they control the information, they can twist it all they want.
Yep.
And that really resonated with me when I first heard it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm the only source you get your information from, well, then you're dependent on me for facts. And if I am inclined to do so, I can, change it, twist it, whatever, to suit my needs and my ambitions and my goals to better suit what I'm trying to do. Instead of just telling you the facts and letting you decide on an opinion.
Right. And I encourage you, if you've never read 1984, go read it.
It is a fantastic book.
The main character, and this is kind of a spoiler, but it's not a big spoiler. It's just kind of plot device spoilerish.
Right. Just a little FYI.
But the main character, his job is with what they call the Ministry of Truth. Mm-hmm. And what his job is to actually take articles or take bits of information, documents, and then change it to a government-approved version of events, destroy the old, and then distribute the new as if it were the true instance of it.
Mm-hmm. There's no paper trail. There's no history of what really occurred. Right. Just what they said happened.
And when did George Orwell write 1984?
I believe back in the 30s or 40s. Like, it was well before 1984. It's almost like he was able to glimpse into the future as far as technology. And I don't want to give a whole lot away.
Right.
But he does talk a lot about them not looking. They're too busy looking at their screens to look up.
Well, they had these things that they were required to have in their homes called telescreens,
which they could not control.
Had monitoring implements in them and things of that nature. People couldn't even write in their own journals. The main character's deathly afraid of someone finding his journal because you weren't allowed to have anything that was not government approved documentation of anything, not even your own feelings.
Right. I always enjoy the part where the parents fear their children turning on them.
They were called spies. Because they were little indoctrinated children.
Right.
Think about school. Think about public school. You're taught that the government is the good guys, whether it be local, state, federal, police are your friends, even though their whole job is to arrest you and put you in jail. Find a reason. Find a broken law when we live in the quote-unquote freest country in the world with the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world.
By a lot.
Right. That's probably combined, several of them. We have more laws on the books than can literally ever be counted. Especially since there's more being made every day. Like, the entire reason for the existence of our legislature is to make more laws. They're never getting rid of any. They're just making more and more and more and more.
Right, just piling on top of the
right. And I'd seen something one time where, if you actually look at the way people live their lives, they commit like 2 felonies a day or something like that.
On a slow day. But,
right. But they're things that you wouldn't even know were a felony. It's just some obscure law that no one, quote unquote, enforces. But believe you me, if anybody was looking for a reason to get after you, they would find that law and they would charge you with it.
Oh, yeah. And it would probably stick.
Because jailing people is a money-making business.
Oh, yeah.
But
billions of dollars every
that's
year.
Another episode entirely. We can talk about the prison industrial complex
Private
at some point.
Prisons.
Oh. But one thing I saw, we both discussed a really glaring instance of media manipulation that we both saw. And this was on social media, but it showed 2 different newspapers talking about the exact same thing, had the exact same picture for the article. Mm-hmm. And then one was like, Trump gets hard on so-and-so and so-and-so. Mm-hmm. And that went to like a more conservative region of the country. Or or no, it was more of a liberal area of the country, and then you've got another version that said Trump backs down on da 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 da, and it went to a conservative part of the country, or vice versa. Yeah. But it was interesting that it's the exact same article, or maybe the exact same subject for the article, right. But depending on where it was going, they had to skew it a different way instead of telling the same story for everyone.
Trying to maximize sales potential. Probably.
Most likely it was not meant for political gain. It was more meant for, okay, well, financial. if we talk good, if it's a good instance for Trump, then it's not going to sell well in liberal territory if we talk good about it. And if it's a bad instance for Trump, it's not going to sell good for us in conservative sections.
Exactly.
If we play it up like it was a failure. And I'm all for capitalism. And everything else, but when you hold news organizations in the high regard of truth, like I'm not going to name names, but one of them's tagline is the most trusted name in news. I think we all know the 3-letter acronym news organization that's referring to.
I believe we do, but
right. And there was also another instance where I saw this one personally, and these two ladies were reporting, and they were supposedly in 2 different areas of the world.
Really?
And you could watch, they were both in parking lots, and you could watch a car pass through one's camera. A couple seconds later, you'd see the same vehicle pass through the other camera. They were supposedly either at least across the country from each other. Supposedly.
They were just a couple blocks
They were literally 100 feet away from each other in a parking lot. But they were claiming they were across the world from each other. Oh, even worse than that. During the I think it was Desert Storm. They were supposedly in a bunker during a bombing or something like that. And they were acting like they were in a bunker during bombing. And they were actually in a studio. It was awful. And they played it up like it was real, never retracted.
Because it sells.
It's lies.
Oh, lies sell.
And so many people don't understand that the First Amendment protects the freedom of the press, and they think that the press is a news organization. The press is every living soul in the United States, period. We all have the freedom to be press. We don't have to have press credentials or a job as a reporter or blah, blah, blah. If I want to walk outside and record something, I think it's newsworthy. It's newsworthy.
Right.
You know, well, may not necessarily be newsworthy, but you get what I'm saying.
But
I have the right
to do so.
Right, the right to film it and then distribute it, no matter whether it's of Joe Schmo down the street, whether it's of a cop, whether it's of a fireman, whether it's,
right.
The president of the United States just happened to be walking down my street. I have the right to record it and then send it out to anybody that I see fit, period.
Done.
A right is a right is a right is a right. I don't have to have anybody's approval. I don't have to have anybody's go ahead.
Permission.
Exactly.
And that reminds me on Anchorman 2, Ron Burgundy. They're talking. They're trying to get their ratings up, and he asked the question, why can't we just tell people what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear? And that's like a turning point in the whole movie. Because now they're just telling you what you want to hear, so you keep tuning in. And you keep putting money in. You keep them employed because they're telling you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear.
We're not telling what you want to hear, dear listener. We're telling you what we want you to hear, but it's what you should hear.
Absolutely.
But don't take our word for it, ever. Educate yourselves. That's all we ask in this. I mean, we know for a fact that you've seen some media manipulation, at least today. I mean, you would think that it would be so much easier to manipulate media prior to today, wouldn't you?
You would think that.
What do you trust more? Something that's been around for a long time or something that's brand new?
Brand new. Exciting, Like when newspapers really started circulating, it was a madhouse back in the day. They were called political machines. People could literally buy newspapers and print whatever they wanted.
You mean they can't now? Oh, wait, they do.
Dun, dun, dun.
But they buy news organizations. They buy TV news stations, and they're the most trusted name in news. Who? By who? By who? Not me. Not me. I don't watch none of the big names in news that I will not name here. I watch none of them. And no, the internet is also not the most trustworthy spot either. But gather multiple sides of the same story, and you'll get closer to the truth than just listening to one side and going on about your business. Because they like to leave out stuff. You know, one news organization is angled one way, other news organizations angled the other way. The last one kind of flip flops depending on what the subject is. But that's because they're owned by somebody. They have to fulfill someone else's interest, not their own. Reporters are no longer reporters. They are prompt readers.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
And I always like to say the technology changes, but the methods don't.
Or I guess reporters probably not the right word. They are reporters. They report the news as they're told to report. They are no longer journalists or
There you go.
right. The death of the investigative journalist is the biggest failure of the American system, in my opinion, as far as protecting our right to know what's going on. You know,
I had a political science teacher in college, and he described it as the media is a gatekeeper, and they determine what gets to you, what information you receive from politicians, the government, as a catch-all term here. And the more I learned, and the more I realized that was absolutely spot-on analogy. They filter information to you.
But then they're also subject to stipulations by those government officials themselves. There are people that will not be asked back to the White House or let into the even local news, like some police departments won't let certain particular reporters or news stations into anything, any press conferences or what have you, because they don't like the spin that's put on whatever they report. You know, if it's too critical of what they do, oh yeah, you're not invited back because you shine a full light on us when we want you to shine it in this way. Right. You know,
I would suggest our viewers look up something called the Alien and Sedition Act. It might be a big eye opener. It's not a long read, but it would certainly give you a new vantage point on how things are supposed to be, how they're written, and then you can see how things really are.
Give our listeners a little bit of what the Alien and Sedition Act is.
Early in our country's history, there were certain politicians who didn't like how they were being criticized by journalists, and they, in a desperate attempt to try to curb these viewpoints, they tried to enact laws that limited freedom of press. I'll just give you that little caveat there. It didn't go over very well. It was quickly snubbed out. You see a lot of that today, where it's the old adage, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And it seems to be, instead of linear history, we have a cyclical history where it just kind of rotates around.
You're not wrong. I mean, because we're dealing with that today. A lot of people are fighting for these people shouldn't be able to say this about this group or that group or whatever. No, we should be allowed to say whatever we want.
Now, you don't have to listen to it.
Right. If you don't agree with it, don't listen to it. You know?
I've never been one for censorship.
No, I don't care what it is. First Amendment protects everybody's opinion and their right to express that opinion, regardless of whether you agree with it or not.
Right. While I may disagree with what you say, I will fight to the death to defend
for
your right
your
to say
ability.
It.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the way it should be. Regardless, like we're not a country that protects your right to be offended. Well, yeah, you have every right to be offended, but we're not gonna jail someone or shut someone up because you're offended.
Right.
This is not a country like that. If you don't like what they say, you have the right to speak out against it as well.
Exactly.
You just can't silence it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, just like us, if anybody disagrees with us, we told you, we warned you, episode 1, that we reserve the right to offend anyone, but
we were going to educate you.
We were going to at least do our best to get you to think.
Right.
And that's what a lot of things right now don't want you to do. They don't want you to think. They want you to take what they feed you and go away. Truth. Right. This is how it is. Don't ask any questions and go on your way. Believe what we tell you. Don't think for yourself. Mm-hmm. Don't do it.
dangerous.
Right. And that's the American school system for you. They want you in this tidy little box. Don't ask any questions. Don't push back in any direction and go on your merry way. But we see how that is failing.
Hard.
Failing. We are so far behind other countries because of that. We are desperate for actual intelligence again, and it is ungodly. And those, look at some of the biggest names that have come out. In I guess the biggest industry right now is tech.
True.
Steve Jobs didn't finish college.
No.
Bill Gates didn't finish college. All these people didn't go through the process of being put into their little box.
Right. They broke free
And
off
they-
on themselves.
Exactly. And they became the biggest of the big, period. And that's the thing. Think outside of the box that you're intended to be in. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Think for yourself. Look it up. Take the time. It's worth it.
I believe Einstein quoted something to the effect of, the only thing that ever got in the way of my learning was my education. Einstein was a bit of a rogue in his day. He really did not like how things were, how they were situated. He wanted to learn what he wanted to learn, not what he was told to learn. And I think that worked out well for him.
I posted a quote on our Facebook group by Gustave Le Bon. The masses have never thirsted after truth. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim.
Very true.
That's true. I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. I think that speaks for itself.
It does.
So, as always, we don't want to be another voice in your ear telling you what to think or what to believe. We want you to educate yourself. We want you to think for yourself. So as always, trust, but verify.